Herzlich willkommen alle. Welcome everybody to this very special lecture tonight. And I would especially like to welcome Andrea Zanderigo from Milan. And I'm very happy, or we are very happy that he could come tonight and share his thoughts about architecture with us, which are, I think, quite unique. And I think it's good that he could find the time tonight to be here. You're part of you have 6 partners, and you have an office with this fantastic name called Baukuh. I'm very excited or curious to hear about this name a little bit more. And you have offices in 3 places or cities in Italy, in Milan and Venice and Genoa.
Yes.
And then you're also not only running an office, but you're also publishers and editors of a very nice architectural theoretic magazine called Zanderigo. And then I think also how your office is structured is quite interesting and unique. You have to correct me if I'm wrong, but
No.
so because I read that your work is like generated through collaborative work, like you don't design, like there's not a single author, but you do it together really. And when I read it and then also looked at your projects, I think you can see that. I think your projects look like really a collaborative process. And also I think it's interesting that you give theory the same space as the practice. And I think that's very rare too, to really create a space around you. Maybe it also has to do with Italy, that you can have or take the space to work theoretically and not only practical, but to really reflect your work in a way, theoretically. Well, and you're also teaching a lot. You taught a lot and you're still teaching a lot, in a lot of places around the world.
Yeah.
Also in Aleppo, Syria.
That's true.
And in Colombia, you just told me, and then EPFL, Lausanne, and ETH, so...
No, ETH
No?
never did.
I read that.
Would like to, but never happened.
Okay. But, yeah, thank you already. And
Thank you very much, Heike, for the very kind words. Thank you. So, hello, everybody. I'm Andrea. Tonight I will present you, let's say, a selection of projects with this kind of very explicit title, which is public buildings, which is indeed something we are very keen about, in a way. It's, I would say, one of the core businesses of our office. So, let's say, just to introduce you where this interest comes from, let's say we are Italian, so you have to add one Giotto here or there. But let's say for us, this is Giotto. This is a very important moment in, let's say, the definition of what a public building might be for, let's say, modernity. Meaning that this is the very first moment in which, let's say, the cities are changing. There's a new class rising. There's the bourgeois, and let's say Giotto is forced in a way to invent a new architecture for this public sphere, which was not existing before, this public sphere. Because whatever we might say about, for example, Greek Republic or, I don't know, Roman Republic, they were very different societies, very different entities. So let's say this is a very important moment in a way for whole Europe in which a new kind of class, a new kind of city life is producing a certain idea of what the public sphere might be. And what is interesting for us in this Giotto paintings is that Giotto is, in a way, reusing what he knew, so fragments of a church, fragments of a temple, stairs, and so forth, in order to stage this public sphere on the public space. No? So he creates this sort of micro-architectures, no? Like, let's say, a little fence, a tribune, a little pulpit, no? In order to be able to represent the key moments, no, of this public sphere. So let's say Giotto as a sort of origin. Why is it important right now to, let's say, focus, even theoretically, to a certain extent, to the public building, to the public architecture? It's important because, let's say, the notion of public is somehow in danger, we might argue, and certainly heavily transformed. No? Let's say this is a shitty picture of the main station in Milan. And let's say one of the trope, no, of, let's say, public architecture, so the station, changed dramatically, no, in the last years for fear of terrorism or for whatsoever. But let's say the platforms, for example, right now are not freely accessible anymore. No, you have to show a ticket in order to enter the platform. So as such, let's say one of the really key buildings of the public life in the cities as we knew it, we knew them. One of these key buildings is now certainly different. No, you cannot walk in freely anymore. And let's say this is due to many reasons. No, it's society, it's politics, it's fear, it's many things at once. At the same time, let's say, as creators, we cannot, let's say, we are part of this game, no? Meaning that if you consider what happened in the arts during the 20th century, in a way, you really have to notice that it's all about the private sphere, no? The public, in a way, completely disappeared from production. Also, you see David Bowie, for example, can't help thinking about me. But it's not only popular culture, it's even, in a way, high culture, meaning that, for example, Jeff Koons, no, monumentalizing his private life in the form of a statue, no, with his wife at the time, which was an Hungarian porno star, Ilona Staller. So let's say the private becomes so important that it becomes a monument. So what does it mean for architects, no? This is a very famous movie. It's called The Fountainhead. It's based on a novel, a nice one, and it's the life of a, let's say, very important, very creative architect, vaguely inspired by Frank Lloyd Wright. The architect is Gary Cooper. And let's say, as you might guess from the title of the movie, no, this Fountainhead, the creation of architecture in this sort of completely privatized universe, it's, let's say, the creation of one architect, and it's directly sourcing from his head, no, without any kind of collaborative process. So let's say that's how the media, no, are in a way, or were in a way representing the idea of creating architecture during the 20th century. Opposed to it, there are, let's say, sort of parallel stories, no? One of them, for example, is this office, McKimmid & White. It's New York, no, based in New York. It's at the turn in between 19th century and 20th century, a fundamental office, because they really created the image of Manhattan as we know it, in a way. So three partners doing architecture together, having at the time the biggest office in the world. They had up to 120 employees, which was a crazy number for the time. And they were heavily sucking the architecture of the past in order to recreate the contemporary modern city of Manhattan. No? Like saying, for example, a very famous sample is Pennsylvania Station, destroyed in the 60s, in which the main hall was copy-paste reproduction of the main room in the Caracalla baths, just scaled 1/3 more. So let's say they were traveling in Europe, buying books from Beaux-Arts students and similar, and then sending them back to the States. And in such a way, they were able to do a massive production in the course of 30 years. They built a lot, and they were able, in a way, to really shape Manhattan for the new emerging power, no? In that case, capitalism. This is a picture of their practice, no? So you got an idea of the extent of the collaboration. A parallel occasion in which they were involved, it's the Chicago World's Fair. And this is something that, in a way, in the States went on, finally becoming what we know as the corporate office. So let's say, I would say even in the most capitalistic form of architectural production, the corporate office, I think you still have a flair, no, of this sort of collaborative spirit of creating architecture and the city. Oh, that's a funny image. These guys are not drawing architecture, they are drawing bombers, but that's okay. So let's say, obviously, how does this translate into the production? The translation is never direct, but I guess that I will try, let's say, to convey you the idea of this kind of work on the kind of public projects we do. So the first project I show you, it's from maybe 5 years ago. It's a project in Antwerp. We were invited in a competition for transforming this monastery, beginning of 20th century, not a nice complex, to be honest, into a civic center. It's in a poor part of Antwerp, mainly inhabited by Muslim people. So, a community center, a civic center, especially for this kind of people. Let's say we went for the most, let's say, cheaply democratic idea, no? So, greenery, no? Green. That's very easy in a way, no? So we thought, let's overimpose the actual building, no? Which is in this sort of fake Gothic with some greenery, no? So you see this bizarre image. The other element of the project we chose is related to the position, no? So the monastery is inside of a block, in a way very close to the station, very close to the zoo in Antwerp, and we thought that the only way to transform it into a civic center was to open it up, no? So in a way to force, almost to force a passage as a typology into it, no? To make it as public, literally as public as possible. So let's say what we did is maybe a bit too radical, and indeed we lost the competition, but we thought we had to demolish the facade of the church for two reasons. First, it's bad architecture, and second, again, imagine, Muslim people in Antwerp, they have to feel that the space is no more a church. I mean, it was as simple as that. So we thought, let's remove the facade of the church, let's expose it, let's clean up the courtyard a bit. And then what we had was, in a way, very simple. So we added this sort of greenhouse, understood as a passage, so a public passage, so it was possible in our minds to cross the block and exit on the other side. And then we rebuilt, we tried to give back a certain definition to the courtyard, no? Adding a new wing and a low building. So here you see the plan of our proposal with this kind of very meandering passage, because obviously the space was tight, no? And this very light porch where the facade of the church was. We even, in a way, rescaled the building towards the city, in order to make it more fitting, in this panorama of small houses, creating this bizarre shift in rhythm between the three eyes of the church and the greenhouse in front. So here you see a section through the passage. And here you see some images of the model we presented. So let's say the new greenhouse in front of the church. The passage on the side. The space of the church, in a way, epurated from all the icons of a church, plus sort of, Brunelleschi-inspired, Alberti-inspired totem for the services, and the exit on the other side. Quite soon after, we did a very similar competition again in Flanders. This one we won. It's again one of these, in a way, projects which are now, at least to us, they are happening more and more. So projects in which you have some architectural matter, and you have to, in a way, with very little means, to reshape it in order to give it a new meaning. So it's a former seminar, now a very big school in a small village, Hoogstraten. I will keep it quite short, but in a way, we won the competition because the competition was for renewing that building. We did a project for that building, but we even did a master plan for the whole school. And in a way, what we told them is that their biggest asset was the courtyard, which was a gigantic courtyard, 200 meters by 40, in a village in which there's no public square, no Grottemarkt, as they say. So we sort of convinced them that in this idea of public life, or whatsoever, their courtyard could have been, in a way, the missing Grottemarkt from the city. And as such, we tried, in a way, to make a bit of order there, but simply adding some porches. In certain cases, they were even acting, for example, this is a bike storage, either in order to mask not so nice buildings, or simply in order to define architecturally the space a bit more. Then we cleaned up the floor in a way, and we inserted some objects into the composition. So here you see these porches, which are trying in a way to keep the space as one space, as a whole, despite all the different buildings which are surrounding it. This project is going on. I think it will take quite some years to be completed. We are now building something there, but it's on the other side of the building, so it's the system of the entrances. So here you see in a way, this sort of attempt. A very different building. It's a small church, again a competition for a small church in Norway, in Haugesund. And let's say there, first, we didn't really know the place because we didn't go there, so we had a vague idea of how it could have been. And what we knew in a way was that the church was supposed to be at the fringes of the village, no? So already in the forest in a way. And we immediately started fantasizing about a sort of almost magic appearance, no? Apparition, sorry, or I'm not sure it's English, but a sort of magic presence in the middle of the forest, no? And we started mounting a set of, in a way, projects which in our minds were related to it. And the first one is this amazing project by UMA. It's an unbuilt project for a competition for a sea terminal in Zeebrugge, which is a gigantic building with this, in a way, very bizarre shape. No? It's partly a dome, no? A sphere, then there's a cone. You might argue it's even an air balloon somehow. It's heavily infrastructural, no? Because all the different means of transportation were collected there. So we thought of this kind of shape, form in the forest. We thought, look, a church maybe needs stairs, no? In order to have a certain ritual, no? Of ascending to the church and so forth, or simply for taking wedding pictures or this kind of stuff. And the third reference, again, related to the idea of trying as much as possible to convey in the very abstract shape of the Zeebrugge project a certain idea of what we might understand as being a church. The third, in a way, project we used is this church by Schinkel in Berlin, in which there's this very narrow, almost unusable porch in front. No? It's so narrow that you cannot really stand there. It's simply there in a way in order to signify the idea of the church and to relate in a way to the street level. No? So this sort of fake porch by Schinkel. Okay, then some, let's say, technical solution about how to, let's say, use the Doric order with a Ionic portal. I mean, it's very technical in a way. Anyway, that was, in a way, the output. And again, from OMA, we used the idea of stacking the program, no? Because we needed a certain amount of architecture, no? All collected in one building in order to make this, this presence in the forest. So we put all the extra program in the base, which is half underground, and then there are the two levels, in a way, of the church, no, slightly raised. And there you see, let's say, all the elements I was talking about. So this hybrid shape, this sort of completely flattened porch, which is, in a way, we were looking at this production by Rachel Whitehead, no? I don't know if you know this artist, an amazing one. So it's almost the calque of a porch, and plus these stairs, in a way, taken from the fantastic villa by Libera and Malaparte in Capri. And then another trick, which is a typical Baroque trick, is the double dome. No? So, in a way, the exterior dome is bigger because it has to relate to the landscape. The inner dome is smaller because it's proportioned on the inner space. No? And in the process, you can even make some space for the structure. The church was supposed to be built in wood, timber, because it's Norway, covered in shingles, so in a way even aging sort of naturally into the forest. And then we had to create a set of images, and we built a big model in foam and gypsum, and as a location for the pictures. It was January, so we went to the mountains in between Milan and Genoa, the Apennines. There was a bit of snow. It's not like Norway, because there are no trees. But we thought that at least, let's say, a bit of Nordic atmosphere was possibly there. So this is the pictures that a good friend of us, a very good photographer, Stefano Graziani, took there. And you see this bizarre object. Obviously, the model is much more abstract than the church, than the project in itself. No? You have to imagine it in shingle, so with a much more rural, in a way, appearance. This is the inner space. And this is probably, I guess, the best moment, in which you don't see the bizarre, difficult hole of the entrance. I show you now a very similar project. In a way, it really uses the same set of tools on a very different scale, because this competition was for a gigantic mosque in Pristina. A mosque, they were asking for a mosque for 10,000 people with a shopping center, huge parking lot, I mean, gigantic complex. As you might know, in the Balkans, there's now a sort of architectural war made by, let's say, the different religions, no? And for example, in Pristina, they built a very big Romanesque church. They built an Orthodox church in the Byzantine way, and in a way, the Islamic community wanted to answer, to the question. And so it is the site. It's like 15 kilometers from the center of Pristina. There's nothing particularly relevant around, but Pristina is quite hilly. So again, there we thought that the fundamental point was to try to make a sort of landmark into the city. The site was this slope, in a way narrow, facing a big access road on the north. And again here, we decided to collect all the program in a single building. We decided to go for, let's say, the Ottoman mosque, so the centralized model, not the forest of columns, so the early Islamic mosque, but the centralized model of the Ottoman Empire. So we started collecting, let's say, various thoughts about this central architecture, so from Sinan, Hagia Sophia, obviously, and other stuff. You will understand why it's there. And we literally started mounting the project on top of each other, the program on top of each other, trying to create a sort of clockwork, which was, again, dealing with this idea of centralized geometry. We even decided to do these two moves, which in retrospect were probably bad moves, because we thought that a contemporary mosque, in a way, doesn't need minarets and doesn't need a dome. So, but then, let's say, we discovered later that the jury was very conservative. The money was Turkish, but we didn't know at the time. I mean, it was only evident at the end of the competition, and they chose a project which was totally, let's say, 15th century, 16th century Ottoman mosque, but Disney style, obviously, because nowadays, if you do something like that, it's made by plastic mostly. So here you see, let's say, in a way, the components of the system, the parking with the portals for entering the mosque, the courtyard, the traditional courtyard, which is in a way an open space in between the mundane part, so the parking and the shopping, and the holy part of the mosque, and then the proper mosque and the drum, so there's not a dome, but there's a drum as the holy space, no, on top of it. And so here you see the final object, and then let's say it is inverted dome, which is a gigantic lamp, which is in a way inspired by these beautiful lamps you find in the Ottoman mosques, no? Which are in a way defining the space of man, no? In between the carpets and the lamp, and then all the rest of the space is just for the god. So let's say this is the final model with the inverted dome inside. Here you see the various plans, no? So the parking, shopping, the courtyard transformed into a terrace. All the extra function of the mosque in the bottom of the mosque itself, so the madrasa, the Islamic school, the auditorium, the house for the imam, and so forth. The men's space, so we were very conservative even on that level. Now we accepted the traditional division. The men's space, the women's space, in the mezzanines. And let's say, obviously this clockwork is creating this sort of monster of a section, no? And yeah, here you see quite clearly, let's say it is inverted dome, which we thought could have been made by small aluminum pieces, no? A bit like, I don't know if you have ever been there, it's a fantastic space. The auditorium of the headquarters of the Communist Party in Paris by Niemeyer, no? They are completely clad with this fantastic aluminum cladding. And obviously, let's say, this monster section is producing an elevation which is maybe not so comfy, no? In a way, it was showing all the contradictions of such a gigantic machine. And we thought that the drum could have been decorated in order to recover a certain appeal in an abstract way, no? Maybe covered with gold. And then we started dealing with the requested views of the competition. We had to make the building smaller in order to make it fit in the proposed angle. And this is, let's say, this is the very low vault, the low dome on top of the terrace. So basically on top of that space, again, in a way traditional, no, the sky, the night sky. And this is an idea of how the inner space could have been, no? With the gigantic lamp, the carpets, this sort of filters, let's say, towards the space of the woman, no? The musharabia, and the mihrab in the back. And maybe the best moment of this architecture, no? Again, very traditional. So during the night, using green neon lights in order to let's say, make it tangible in the landscape, which is something, if you go to Egypt or Syria or this kind of places, it's really the thing in the landscape, no? So, let's say, now another project, not anymore a church or a mosque of some sort. It's a project, it came out of a competition in 2011. It's a competition we won and we built, luckily. And let's say the project is part of a very big development now, which is this huge cluster of new towers in Milan called Porta Nuova, the development. It's Italian/American money. It was Heinz, the developer. Nowadays, it's totally bought by Qatar, so it even changed hands. This is, in a way, the whole project. They had to pay 40 million to the municipality for the development, and part of this money was used in order to build 3 buildings. One of them is House of Memory, which is a very small public building. It's a hybrid building, meaning that it's a building which is focused on some tragic events of the 20th century, notably, let's say, the end of Second World War, so the partisans and so forth, and the terrorism from the late 70s and early 80s. So it's these 2 crucial moments. There are 5 associations inside: the partisans, the victims of terrorism, the victims of Nazi and Fascist deportations for political reasons, so not the Jews, let's say. They have a separate museum in the main station. Another association related to terrorism, and a big archive on the history of liberation from a war we started with, let's say, the Germans, but okay. And let's say, so there's these associations, the offices, there's a public floor for exhibitions, there's this archive, and so forth. It's a hybrid building. There was a project done by Studio Boeri, so Stefano Boeri. At a certain moment, he decided to run in order to become mayor of Milan. He lost, but he decided to stop all the projects, all the public projects he had in Italy in order to avoid conflicts of interest. So they did a competition. And let's say this is one of the entries, maybe not the best one, but I'm not showing this in order to judge it. I'm simply showing it in order to say that both, in a way, Stefano Boeri and basically all our competitors were interpreting memory as a glass box, no? So in terms of accessibility and so forth. We started really from the opposite side. We thought that, in a way, the content of this memory was extremely fragile. And immediately we started fantasizing about this sort of objects, no? This is a wooden box. It's in the Vatican. It contains pieces of saints and Holy Land, no? And in a way, what is interesting for us is that, so the memory is inside, and the box, it's in a way talking about the content, no? It's protected the content, at the same time talking about the content. So you got scenes depicted on the cover, no? So, let's say, if you start dealing with the idea of a building in which you try to represent on the facades, let's say, no? On the box, fragments of the memories which are inside, obviously you start to deal with the idea of the polyptic, no? So you go back to, for example, Piero della Francesca. But then you start saying, okay, but it's 21st century, maybe you need a bit of modernity. Gerhard Richter is always there to help you, luckily, not only because of abstraction, but even because of a very famous set of paintings, which is about a terrorist group in Germany, Baader-Meinhof. At a certain moment, Gerhard Richter made these paintings in black and white. And what is interesting for us is that 2 things. One is that the set is composed by very small portraits and very big collective scenes. The other thing is that, in a way, his signature blurred technique started signifying in our minds the idea, a double idea, no? In a way, the impossibility to forget and the possibility to remember, no? Precisely. So this sort of distance in between the object of the memory and, let's say, the reproduction of this memory, no? So this is Gerhard Richter. We started thinking about a possible process collective process in order to in a way, define these scenes. And we started, in a way, collecting buildings in which this feature, no, of the images on the facade was present. No? And I think one of the best we found is the National Library in Mexico City by Juan O'Gorman. Juan O'Gorman is the guy who built, for example, the house and atelier of Diego Rivera and Frida Kahlo. So Juan O'Gorman built this modernistic library, and then on top he put the archive, almost a windowless box. And then there's this really fantastic decoration, no, depicting all the ancient myths of Mexico. So let's say Juan O'Gorman, a certain idea of framing, you know, this is a Bas Princeton picture in the Nile Valley. Milanese references. This is a fantastic building by Muzio. It's a convent. And what we like here is, let's say, the materiality, so it's bricks, in a way, very Milanese. And it's even the fact that it's a very hybrid building, no? It's Muzio in the 30s flirting with the idea that his architecture was starting to date, no? to age badly. And he had to update his language, no? So he's in a way trying to become modern, but so dealing, let's say, with Tarani, you know, with this kind of guys, with the youngsters, at the same time not really able to grasp the essence of modernity, you know? So it's way too heavy, way too massive, you know, in order to be completely modern. You know? It has this hybrid status. And then, let's say, a very peculiar tradition of polychrome decoration in terracotta in Milan, which is, for example, a very good sample, it's Santa Maria delle Grazie by Bramante, somehow. In a way, let's say the facade of the building started to appear, no? So bricks, polychromy, the polyptych, small portraits, big collective scenes, no? And that's what we proposed for the competition. The plan was never an issue, because the plan, let's say the plot is as big as the building. It's heavily related in our minds to what happens on the north, no? So the consolidated part of the city. So in a way, we accepted from the very beginning the idea that it was a rectangle. And we started digging into, let's say, possible sources, no? So, for example, Corn House in Bern, no? So a building in which the content is so precious for the community that even though it's storage, it becomes monumental, no? Another fantastic building, this is Orsan Michele in Florence, and it's a very strange building because it was originally a public porch, a loggia for trades. Then it became a church, so they closed the openings, and in a way, they built a palace on top. It's a very bizarre building. And then this very consistent tradition of the so-called Venetian schools. They are not so schools, but they are centers of power and of welfare as well. No? So, and what is important is that they are, in a way, monumental, but they are not the first monuments of a city. No? It's almost a second line of monuments. And they are very consistent in terms of typology. So they always have a ground floor, big room, one space, with columns in the middle, and a monumental stairs on the side. So, in a way, the plan was there, 6 squares, 2 columns, a monumental stairs, 2 entrances, north and south, and 2, let's say, service wings on the 2 sides. We decided to expose a part of the archive, because the archive is not accessible, but we thought it was important, in a way, to feel the presence of the archive, so we inserted this triple height, where the big stairs, and the archive are co-present in a way, and we tried as much as possible with the big stairs to connect the public floor, ground floor, with the public top floor, where the reading room is, and we thought, let's put a bar there, let's put a set of 2 terraces, ascending back to the city in a way. So these are the other plans. For the competition, we produced a set of images, again with Stefano Graziani. The real site was totally a disaster, at the moment, because they were building the towers. So we thought, where should we take the pictures? We decided that, in a way, Duomo Square, rhetorically, was okay, meaning that it was at least easy to understand that the ambition of this relatively small building was to be part of the public infrastructure of the city. So we went there 6 a.m. in order not to have problems with the police. They came to us, but only at 7:30. We put the model in front of the Duomo. Stefano took the pictures. Let's say they are obviously a bit strange, but they worked somehow. Yeah, here they are. And we knew from the very beginning that the budget was tight. So there was not so much money. The facade was expensive. And so the interior had to be very cheap. In a way, harsh. We thought, okay, Villanova Artigas could help there. So a certain Brazilian modernism, which is all about rubber floors and exposed concrete and so forth, but not the Swiss one, rough concrete. And then there, okay, the stairs has another quote, because we are a bit obsessive, so there's the stadium in Milan with these fantastic ramps, which were added in the early 90s, So in a way, this stair is a reduced version of these amazing ramps. And here you see, let's say, the model for the competition. And it's basically a dignified garage, It's very simple, only in a way the proportions are there in order to make it more of a monument of some sort. This guy, Cesar Pelli, was the head of the jury. I don't know if you know him. I mean, he's now 85. He built, I think, 150 towers around the world, very famous architect. And I guess we won, I mean, at least that's what they said. He entered the room where the models were. He said, I don't like it. It's not really my style, but in a way, if you want a house of memory, that's it. And soon after, they started publishing on the newspapers images in which, probably in order to avoid questions about building the house of memory in Duomo Square, they were using our images, cutting off the background and then placing a bright sky in the back. So that's what appeared on the newspapers. There was a super long process, 1 year, with the associations in order to define the final set of images. It was very difficult. And we started making mock-ups, so sampling these images. We thought, starting dealing with the company, the brick company, we thought of using 6 colors. It's 4 reds and 2 grays. We started sampling the images and transforming them into matrices. And let's say these matrices are physically composed by a quarter of a brick. So basically you have a pixel which is 5.5 by 5.7 and then 12 centimeters deep. So you cut a brick like this, like in a cross. And we started making some mock-ups. We were, in a way, happy with the results. And then there was a big problem. This is the lower part, where the patterns, the abstract patterns, are using half a brick. There was the big problem of understanding how to build it. on the site. No? And the final solution was a very, in a way, low-tech one. So we printed one-to-one on paper all the matrices, and basically, at a certain moment, House of Memory was a gigantic yellow cube of foam, and we went there. With ropes, we designed, we drew, the frame, and then they started, roughly square meter by square meter, to glue these papers, these sheets of paper, and then they had 6 piles of bricks behind their shoulders, because when their bricks are wet, they are all the same, and they were simply filling the gaps, and then removing the paper at the end of the square meter. So it was relatively smooth as a process, and because, let's say, if one brick is wrong, it doesn't matter. If it happened like 3 times that they placed the wrong sheet, but in a way it's not a drama, because after the 3rd layer you start to see the mistake, and so you can recover from it. These are the final drawings for the execution. This is the biggest compromise, in a way. We had to do a lot of compromises, but this is the biggest. Okay, the House of Memory as built is 93% of what it was, which is not an issue. At the same time, let's say, especially the associations were not so supportive about the idea of a top public floor. There was an issue with budget and so forth. At a certain moment, we weren't able anymore to support the idea of this public floor. So what happened is that the basement with the archive disappeared. The archive went to the top floor, which is a bit crazy, but okay. And in the process, we had to add a box with machines on top, which is not very nice, but okay. And in a way, let's say, it's now almost an anti-climax, meaning that the huge stairs which was there in order to connect these 2 public floors is, in a way, a bit less reasonable as an entity there. At the same time, we thought, let's keep it. Let's keep it for the simple reasons that it's a machine of vision that allows you to, while ascending, to understand the whole building. And even if it does end simply in the reading room, it's okay. And in a way, we are even able to justify its presence with them, because at a certain moment, we used 1/3 of the core in order to host a huge water tank, which is the one on the left there. It's like 12 meters high, it's for the fire emergency system. And in a way, the moment you introduce this sort of functional reasons, nobody is able to contest anymore, your choices. So the stairs, as you can see, they started building it. We were, I think, very lucky with the building company, because they were able to do some kind of difficult formwork, and even to solve these very difficult moments in which the stairs, for example, is so close to the archive, to the exposed part of the archive. My favorite moment, in which the stairs is touching the top floor. At a certain moment, the stairs was there. They were the company, the contractor, was so happy about it that they didn't want to paint it yellow. So they did some mock-ups there for the paint, but they were absolutely against it. We convinced them, saying that it was not possible to leave it gray. The building needed a bit of color, so at a certain moment the color was there. The texture is still visible. The facade was there after 3 months, and that's in a way the building, the finished building. In its bizarre position, let's say, in between the new developments on the south and the old city on the north. So you see these very different contexts on the 2 sides. it's really this kind of box which is protecting the memory. It's very closed in a way. At the same time, in a way vibrant, and in a way it's very difficult to date it. No, it's very difficult to understand whether it was built 5 years ago, 1 year ago, 50 years ago, 100 years ago, which I think it's in a way an achievement. And here you see some images of the interior. Let's say the interior was from the very beginning thought as a sort of background for the life into it. So here you see the images as it was immediately after completion. Now it's very different. No? It's full of life. They added a lot of stuff. So in a way, I think on that level it worked quite well. And here you see the radical proximity, no, in between the archive, the stairs, and the offices. The cheapest installations we could buy, no, but simply nicely disposed. The octagonal pillar. And then some details of the facade. So, another project, a different one. It's a much bigger project. It's a project we won 2 years ago in Tirana. It's the campus for the state university, but for the dorms. No? So there are like 10,000 students sleeping there. At the moment, there are no faculties, so it's only these dormitories. And it's a set of relatively shit buildings from the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, poorly built, close to the center of Tirana, in a way part of this quite impressive landscape. No? So you got the city, no, in the middle of this valley and all these little hills around it. And let's say there was not so much quality there. Probably the biggest quality was, again, the empty space in the middle, sloping down. So let's say this sort of space there. And we saw there the opportunity to create an identity for this set of very different buildings, which we were supposed to renovate and transform in a way. So what we did, it's basically to clean up the middle of it, to create this sort of meandering porch in order to define the campus lawn in the middle. And then we started transforming the buildings around, plus we added some faculties, no, in order to, let's say, make it alive during the whole day, not only during the night. And let's say the idea, no, of the empty space as a resource is clearly an ancient one. It is Circus Massimo, in which the definition is simply made nowadays by this sort of ditch, no, on the side. Yeah, the idea that you have to, let's say, make a mixed use program in order to make it work. And here, let's say, the space of the project was found in between these two models. One is Jefferson, University of Virginia. Fantastic project in which, let's say, the buildings of the campus are in a way almost over, no? Above the porch which is defining the lawn. And then this very abstract porch by Niemeyer, Ibiroquera Park. In a way, let's say, our porch was somehow there, no? So a meandering porch, quite abstract, adapted to the slope, on which the existing buildings and the new ones were, in a way, connected to the lawn. And here you see the definition of the lawn in itself, no? And the idea, no, that in a way the buildings could have presented themselves on the lawn over the porch, as in the University of Virginia. program. First strategies about how to deal with the existing buildings, no? So in a way, we had to redo the insulation. So if you redo the insulation, you can paint them, and maybe you can always use the base in a different color in order to connect them visually. Sustainability. And the idea, let's say, of using the porch in order to use it as an infrastructure, if possible, no? So as the position for the piping, no? The typological transformation of the existing buildings plus the new ones. So, let's say, bigger rooms, private bathrooms, and this sort of stuff. And the first visualization of the elements of the complex. So, the existing building repainted, insulated, an added element in order to show the face of the building towards the porch, and these bizarre totems here and there, which the engineers said that they were sort of micro-generators of some sort. Here you see, let's say, even the fact that we decided not to make everything fit, no, in order to create this sort of complexity. The piping into the porch, a bit of, let's say, business plan, and so forth, and stop motion of the possible transformation. Let's see how it will go. They need 80 millions. So far they have 4 millions, so I'm not so positive, but let's see. Very small project. I think it's almost finished. So a very small project. It's an exhibition design. It's a show about Super Studio in Milan, in a building by a famous building in a way. It's called the PAC, Padiglione Arte Contemporanea, by Ignazio Gardella. Super Studio, you might know, no? They were doing this sort of stuff, no? The continuous monument. They were part of the radicals. This is the PAC. Before '92, it was once a beautiful building, let's say modernism from the 50s, no? A set of flowing spaces, a great ceiling with skylights, and then the space was flowing into the garden. In '92, they put a bomb there. It was a moment in Italy in which 3 bombs were placed, no? And the building was rebuilt by Studio Gardella, but unluckily, the father was too old to control it, and in a way, the renovation totally ruined it, no? Because they closed the skylights, they added this ugly aluminum ceiling in order to to hide the installations, no? And in a way, the space is completely ruined. So we thought, let's transform radically the space using the continuous monument, literally, using, in a way, the roughness of early Franco-Ugari architecture. This is Indiana Studios, in which he left the gypsum boards inside unplastered, no? Only the joints are plastered. In a way, we thought, okay, if the modernistic building is ruined, what we can do, and by the way, we even needed small rooms in order to make space for the videos. What we can do is to transform this museum in an old museum. So a corridor, an enfilade, no? So you see that what we added is this red set of walls and openings in a way, no? Which are dealing heavily with the existing geometries, but heavily transforming it in a way in a totally different architecture. So here you see the entrance room, no? In which you have the stairs going up to the mezzanine, and you see, let's say, a first fragment of the new museum somehow. It's all gypsum board. At a certain moment, they were not so happy with the plastered joints, so we left them untouched. In a way, it's even more similar to the continuous monument. But as you can see, it's two continuous monuments facing each other, and they are obviously much less abstract, because suddenly they become architecture. They have to deal with different heights, no? They have to deal with different height of the pavement, no? So here the openings are very high and here very low and so forth. And let's say this is the counter view, no? And in the back, in a way, everything was visible, no? And so all the structure was visible. The depth of the wall was totally fake, no? So it was simply sort of enlarged system of thresholds. And this is the stairs going up, and probably the best moment in which, from the middle of the stairs, you, in a way, were able to understand the whole machine, no, in one site. So last project is a project I've never shown. It's a competition we did 2 years ago. I mean, sometimes we do crazy competitions, meaning that this is a competition, obviously, an architect from Europe cannot win. No, it's something, it's impossible to win. At the same time, we were interested into Iran, we still are, meaning that, let's say, we did like 2 or 3 competitions there in the last 2 years. It was even politically, no, a good moment. Obama was sort of opening up to Iran, no, and in a way trying to find a new balance, no, in between Sunni and Shia. We thought, let's do it, even though obviously it was a very problematic competition. It's the Museum of Islamic Revolution, so it's something. I mean, it's a bit difficult to agree, no, upon. So. So 79, no, you know all the story. Before there was a sort of kingdom, no, and then a sort of theocratic apparatus was installed. The site for the competition is in Tehran, in the south, and this is the big monument for the Ayatollah Khomeini. And just south there was this big plot along the highway. Here you already see our project. In a way, we decided to build a sequence of 5 rooms, gigantic rooms. And in a way, the sequence was inspired by, vaguely, by this drawing, which is a drawing of this hall in the palace of Darius in Persepolis. So it's Iran, indeed. Here you see, in a way, the 5 rooms towards the mausoleum of the Ayatollah Khomeini, the highway, the center of the Iran, the mountains on top. Here's the view from the mausoleum, no? And we decided to, let's say, stay low, in a way to accept this sort of hierarchy. So we were saying 5 rooms, in a way it's a progression. It's exactly reproducing their ideological program, one-to-one, as a sequence of events, now from the ancient kingdoms of Persia to the events before and after 79. So here you see the program, no, with all the detailed, in a way, years. And here you see the 5 spaces in a sequence, no? So it's a gigantic building, a very low one, and it's either dealing with the idea of an open courtyard. Okay, this administration is a bit different, it's on 3 floors. So it's either open courtyards or rooms completely filled with columns and objects, no? And it starts with a lot of columns, then a bit less, then less, then less, and then it ends in this sort of final pose. No, it's like it's a pond, it's a pool at the end. And let's say all the machinery of the Islamic Revolution is presented there. No, so you enter, you have the car park, and then immediately the planes, then administration and all the ancillary functions. Then you have all the tanks, no? And here all the other stuff. And you see it's very low building, in a way very boxy-like. And you end up in the pond with some ships. Here the section of the building where you have a lot of columns, where you have less columns, and a sequence of images, so extremely simple from the outside, no? Extremely low, in a way dealing with the highway, low for the size of it. This is the mausoleum for Khomeini in the back. The first courtyard, the second courtyard, the first room, let's say with many columns, the ancient times, the courtyard in the middle with rockets, the second big room with less columns, and then the third room, and then the final pond with ships. And let's say it was, I just want to tell you one thing about this, this museum. It was so difficult. We had at the moment a Czech employee working for us, no? And we told him, yeah, you should do this project in the next month and a half and so forth. And it was so difficult to convince him. Let's say for like 1 week, every day he was coming to me or to us and saying, I cannot do it, come on, we cannot do it, and certainly I cannot do it. No? So it was this continuous game of convincing him that we had to do it despite the fact that we were, in a way, highly critical towards the ideological content of the operation. So that's all. Thank you very much, and yeah, if you have questions, please do not hesitate. Thank you.
Why did you have to do this competition? How were you sure you had to do it?
But I mean, there are many different reasons. One is that we are egoistically very obsessed with certain themes, let's say, which are architectural, meaning, for example, the relation between architecture and rituals, architecture and ideology, you know, this sort of stuff. So in a way, it's a fascinating theme, no? A museum for this kind of gigantic ideological construction. Second, for many different events, but in a way in the last 10 years, we had been dealing a lot with the Middle East. In Syria, it was mentioned before, Egypt, Palestine, and now it's a couple of years that we are trying to understand whether Iran is, in a way, a possibility as a market. And let's say, as I said, I think it was a very good moment to show a certain openness towards Iran, politically speaking. And I even think that in a way Italy had always this kind of ambiguity, no? And at the same time extreme openness, no, towards Iran, and not only Iran. You know? If you think, for example, Enrico Mattei, so the politics of the national company for energy in the 50s, 60s, Italy had always been sort of, literally, no, sort of bridge, no, in between. And I think it's in a way a role that Italy should try to continue to have. So it was important even in a way, as a position towards the inner politics of Italy. I mean, obviously, architecture is not so powerful to influence anything. At the same time, it's true that sometimes you do something for reasons which are, in a way, very, very complex. And at the same time, I have to say, you know that you cannot win. And that's a big relief, no? Because you can do a project, and at the same time, it remains, from the very beginning, it is clear that it's a purely academic exercise. No? It will not have an impact on the real world, at least not the impact of a built building. No? I mean, I know it's still a bit confusing, but that's all I can say about it in a way. I don't know if I really answered your question, or if you meant something more specific, let's say.
Yeah. So, good evening. Thank you for the lecture. I have a question regarding just the last point you made, saying in one way you feel like you need to give an answer to such a program, and in another way you give a very academic project. So it's for them very difficult. I mean, in a way I'm asking, what is the feedback you got from this competition entry, or did you got any at all?
You mean personally what we had back?
No, I'm saying that you give a quite academic proposal to a project where you feel like you need to participate, but in that sense it makes sometimes difficult an answer from the, let's say, competition organization side.
But let's say, I mean, the project was totally serious, despite the fact that it might look as being full of sense of humor, maybe a dark sense of humor. But let's say the project in itself, I think it was totally serious. Let's say we really tried as hard as possible to complain with all their little, let's say, notes about periods, no, and let's say functional and so forth. At the same time, we even tried as much as possible to try to understand which kind of architecture could be personified. Let's say could personify this sort of idea, no, of continuity and the revolution and so forth. No, so. In a way, the project is totally serious, but at the same time, I mean, it's clear that in certain occasions you do something and you do it more for yourself than for the others, and I mean that's how it is. Let's say the life of an architect is always dealing with this issue. No, even in the most concrete project, you try to use someone else's money in order to achieve something for yourself, no? And that's the beauty. But it's true, and that's the beauty of architecture as a profession in a way. And let's say this is obviously I don't know how to say, but the ratio in between the egocentric and the purposeful in a project, it's always changing. No? Sometimes the ratio, the portion of what you do for yourself is necessarily almost nothing. Sometimes it's almost everything. This is a case of clearly almost everything, no? Because, yeah, you know that it's virtual. At the same time, it doesn't mean that as an architecture is not a serious proposition. It is a serious proposition.
At the beginning, she told about the constellation of your office. But could you speak something about that? Because she thought it was very special.
I don't know if it is that special, but what is true is that at the very beginning, we were 8 partners, which is an insane amount of partners, no? And in a way, it even happened without really deciding it, no? Meaning that we were a group of friends, we were doing different stuff at the time, even living in different cities, and but at the same time, in the free time, we were doing competitions, and we were doing competitions. Sometimes three people, no, sometimes 5, sometimes 8, sometimes 10, different people. What happened is that in 2003, we won 2 competitions, basically in the same moment, because we won European 7 in Amsterdam and Budapest. And with 8 people, because that time we were in 8. No? And suddenly, you know, you have a bit of money, because they give you a prize. There's a certain urgency, no, to have an office. And so, let's say, it happened that we were 8 people. And obviously, to make architecture with 8 people is very different than to make architecture alone or with 2 people. In a way, with 1, 2, 3 people, you can simply sit at one table, you can start sketching, you can talk about it, and after a while you get to an agreement. With 8 people, we discovered, let's say, in a certain period, it's not something we discovered immediately. We discovered that in a way it was much easier to make projects talking about other projects. Because obviously, let's say, if I do a sketch and I put it on the table, everybody is seeing very different things on that sketch. If at the same time I'm referring to an idea which is present in another building, and you can go to the shelves and show that idea, no? Take a book and show the idea, everything is immediately much more clear and much richer. Because in a way, you are not only being more precise, no? It has a name, it has a materiality, it has... You are even, in a way, stealing a bit of the complexity, of the richness of that fragment, no? And hopefully reusing it, no? And then, okay, it is true that it became an habit for us, but we were even ideologically totally prepared to accept it, no? Meaning that, and it's something we always said, I mean, we are conscious that architecture is a lot about continuity. It's a collective activity. It's let's say, a continuous history in which you are simply a small part of it. No? And if you accept it, you even accept the fact that you have to deal with the vastness, no, of this heritage, in a way. And yeah, so why can't you do it openly, in a way? I mean, I remember, because we were talking briefly about Villaretz before, no? So now it comes to my mind. I remember talking with Villaretz about this quite some years ago, and he told me that each time he was sketching something, and this something was looking like something else, he was throwing the sketch away. So, let's say, in his mind, everything was about inventiveness, was about originality. In our minds, architecture cannot invent anything. I mean, there's nothing to invent. You have simply to find the solution somewhere, or a set of solutions, and you have to make hybrids. You have to reinterpret, you have to misinterpret, because sometimes great things are happening out of misinterpretations. No? But And in that sense, let's say, yeah, that's how we deal with production.
But how do you select the images? I think even selecting something is quite challenging. Like you have to relate to your own context, to someone else's context, to a global context, to a local context, and also to different histories. And I think also through the internet or through the accessibility of all kinds of different images, it becomes very random also. I mean, how do you, I mean, is there a certain methodology to?
No, there is not. I mean, I don't think there is a receipt, no? Because, I mean, as always with architecture, everything is extremely subjective. Yeah. So there's not a technique. At the same time, what is true is that architecture has this very ambiguous position, no? Which is, let's say, the Kant position. No? It's Kant talking about beauty, no? And judgment of beauty. So the judgment is necessarily subjective, but it's made in the ambition, with the ambition of it being universal. No? So there's always this sort of polarity. No? There's this subjectiveness, and at the same time, you try your best in order to interpret a certain universality. No? But that's extremely, I think, it's extremely abstract. No? So I don't think there's a receipt. Obviously, if you want to act like that, you have, in a way, to know a lot. No? You have to study a lot. You have to, let's say, travel with your always increasing baggage of images and plans, and because if you do not know anything, you cannot produce. But that's in a way obvious, I think. You cannot produce out of ignorance, especially in a field like architecture. I mean, architecture is a cultural practice. Full of technical elements, no? You need to, in a way, be in love with the idea of producing, so you need to love materiality, you need to love the object, you need to love technique. At the same time, it's a totally cultural practice. There's nothing scientific into architecture. There's nothing, there's never one solution, no? It's not like science. Not even science is like that, by the way, but let's say it's not rocket science, no? And so I think, let's say, knowledge is a fundamental part of it. Even for the architects which are, in a way, never talking about their knowledge. They prefer, let's say, to tell another story.
I think also knowledge is quite subjective, so there is no...
No, sure.
So, yeah, for me, I'm always asking myself also, like, how I relate to international, like to act international as an architect. And so I think it's interesting to see both parts on your work, like this project in Milan, which I also, the way you presented it was very different from the other projects, also maybe because of the scale.
Yeah, because it's built in a way, no? It's built and suddenly you have very different layers of complexity, no? Acting. So suddenly the story is simply bigger, I would say. But
I think there's also a different approach when you really come, you live in a certain culture or you don't live in a certain culture. And No, for sure. Let's say the specific context of Milan, for example, in that case was very relevant. And obviously I think there's even another element. Obviously when you build or design, let's say, at home, you know better, no? No.
Which is, it's not always an advantage, but at the same time, it's true that the story is already more complex because maybe there are more interpretations and less misinterpretations. No? Let's say, obviously, the idea I can formulate of, for example, Iran or Norway remains maybe a bit schematic. No? But at the same time, really, I think the two polarities, no, like subjective and universal, like let's say local and global. Obviously, it's all connected and oscillating. No, these two polarities are always present. I mean, I think good architecture is never regional, for example. It might include regional elements. It might deal with the local, certainly it has to, but good architecture is always global, is always universal. If not, it wouldn't be recognized as such, no? I don't know. That's my feeling. But let's say all the heap on regionalism, which is now defunct. No, it was very much there like 20, 30 years ago. Yeah. I think the good architects were not regionalist at all. I mean, Alvaro Siza, it was part of the scene as a regionalist, but he was not a regionalist. His architecture is clearly universal from the very beginning.
But I think Swiss architecture is quite regional, don't you think? Or some other questions?
No, she asked at the beginning what's the meaning of Baukuh.
Oh, wow. I mean, it's a very boring story. It's a very boring story. I will try to get it as short as possible. Before having the office, I was trying to do with some friends, like a much larger group, like 20 people. We were trying to set up an association for research into architecture, meaning an association producing books, researches. We didn't know really very much, but the name was Baukuh, so the color cow, no? And which is, by the way, a quote from the Zarathustra by Nietzsche. So Zarathustra, at the end of his life, is going to rest in a city called Baukuh. I don't know why, but I mean, it's like that. And we had a logo with a cow, so the association was meant to be called Baukuh. And then when we won Europan, it was really in that moment, and I mean, we were young, we were a bit naive, no? We thought, okay, the office has to be the operative arm of the association, no? So it has to have a relation. So it's not the Baukuh, maybe it's the coup something else, no? What kind of coup could it be? And let's say, we literally had to choose a name in one night, because we went from Salzburg, where there was the winning ceremony of Europan Budapest. Budapest was the only site in there, so they decided to have the ceremony with the Austrians, no? And we went from there during the night with the van to Rotterdam, where there was Amsterdam, the Dutch ceremony, no? And the lady from Rotterdam, from Europe and the Netherlands, she told us, "Do you have an office?" We told her no, and she told us, "Okay, tomorrow we will meet with the developers. You need to have an office." So let's say during the night with her, and the result was Baukuh. So the only name which survived the night was Baukuh, which is clearly a bit of a joke, because it sounds a bit like Baukunst or Baukostruzione, and I don't know, Baukuh, the short for it, but it's Baukuh, no? And by the way, it works decently or undecently even in Dutch, because you simply write it differently, no? B-O-W-C-O-E, but it's basically the same sound, you know? And yeah, that's it.
So, if there's no last question, I think it's a nice final word. Or I have another question, the last question. If there is something you could give the students on their way home, is there something you would...
I don't know. Maybe the only thing I can say is that if you don't like it 100%, leave the faculty now because because it's a terrible job. It's a terrible job. I mean, there's less and less money involved. It creates a lot of stress. The only good thing is probably there's plenty of benefits, bizarre benefits, like being here, for example. It's a benefit, you might argue, but it's really a terrible job. So let's say, think twice before finishing and devoting your life to architecture.
Thank you. And